Quentin Edwards was born and raised in Ohio, which is known for its farming and agriculture. From an early age, young Quentin helped his parents on the farm and was used to hard work. Unfortunately, his parents' relatively small income could never cover all the costs associated with farming. This was the case because the land on which the Edwards family sowed corn and other crops wasn't too fertile and didn't have quality irrigation. For this reason, the family had to live hand-to-mouth in the truest sense of the word. Quentin was deprived of all the luxuries that his peers from wealthier families had. Faced with hopeless poverty daily, the teenager dreamed that one day his life would change. It wasn't easy for him to decide to go to New York. By the time he graduated high school, the family's income decreased further, which promoted Quentin to take action. At that age, many dream of doing something lucrative. Quentin was no exception. He succumbed to the persuasions of friends and acquaintances and moved to New York. At the time, he did not know exactly what he would be doing and for which industry he would be working. Fortunately, the employment issue was resolved fairly quickly. He got a job at a metalwork assembly plant and began to earn money. He was able to rent an apartment and even put some money aside for his parents. The work was hard, and by the time of his shifts, Quentin was extremely exhausted. He took the bus home and often fell asleep in the back seat, knowing that his colleagues would wake him up at the right spot. But one time, Quentin was taking the bus alone. His usual work partner was sick, and no one replaced him on that shift. Unbeknownst to himself, Quentin dozed off and almost missed his stop. At that moment, he felt a slight nudge on his shoulder and opened his eyes. Before him stood a young woman with blue eyes and long, curly hair. "I think this is your stop," said the stranger. "That's right. How did you know?" Quentin asked cautiously. "We've been taking the same bus for some time now. You didn't notice me because you were always asleep. I get off at the next stop, so I involuntarily learned your stop," the young woman answered with a smile. That evening, Quentin deliberately missed his stop in order to keep talking to the young woman. It turned out that the young woman's name was Megan, and like Quentin, she was not from New York. The young people were quickly drawn to each other. They talked about anything and everything and did not notice how much time had passed. When saying goodbye outside of Megan's house, they made plans to meet up the next day. Quentin and Megan began to see each other almost daily. Quentin almost made sure to walk Megan home after work. Their romance grew so quickly that it came as a complete surprise to many. Perhaps this is what happens when fiery hearts consumed by passion feel mutual attraction towards each other. 6 months after they met, Megan and Quentin got married. 5 months after their wedding, little Sarah was born. Sarah immediately became the center of her parents' universe. Quentin and Megan surrounded the baby with care and attention and directed all of their efforts towards her upbringing. It seemed that the Edwards family had finally found the happiness that so many dream of. Unfortunately, as it usually happens, trouble crept in unnoticed. Megan had often complained of stomach pain, but attributed it to indigestion and tried to stick to a healthy diet. Quentin repeatedly urged his wife to see a doctor. In response, Megan said that she had no time and no one to leave Sarah with. That wasn't really true. 5-year-old Sarah was a very smart and calm girl, and it would not be difficult to find her a babysitter. In the meantime, the pain got stronger and stronger. Megan tried to push through the discomfort. In order to relieve the pain, she took ibuprofen. One day, when Megan was busy in the kitchen, she became very ill. The pain was so strong that Megan had a hard time getting to the phone to call an ambulance. When Quentin returned home from work, he found Sarah crying. He picked up his daughter and rushed to the hospital. In the lobby, Quentin was met by a doctor who informed him that Megan was seriously ill. "Why did you wait so long? You should have come much sooner. At such an advanced stage of cancer, the treatment will be very difficult," the doctor said. "Cancer?" asked Quentin, turning pale. "That's right, but don't worry, I'll do everything in my power, I promise you," the doctor tried to reassure the man. The doctor's words made Quentin feel better and made him believe that everything would go back to normal. As soon as he left the doctor's office, he went up to little Sarah and told her that her mother would get better. The following day, Sarah and Quentin bought a large bouquet of flowers and went to the hospital to visit Megan. But when they entered the building, they saw the nurse's tear-stained face. Mr. Edwards, we are very, very sorry. But your wife... The nurse began to speak, stammering over every word. What happened to my wife? Quentin exclaimed, refusing to believe the worst. It turned out that Megan died 1 hour before the arrival of her husband and daughter. Daddy, didn't you say that everything would be okay? Sarah said, starting to cry. Quentin had nothing to say. He could hardly stand. The funeral and everything that followed felt like a dream. Sarah always cried, which made Quentin even more miserable. If it weren't for his daughter, the man would have likely gone off to the deep end and maybe even lost his will to live. However, the inconsolable widower had a little girl who needed care and attention. Time stood still for Quentin. Even 2 years after Megan's death, Quentin was still with her in his mind. Not a day passed without Quentin thinking about his ex-wife, who was his perfect partner. When he got especially sad, he locked himself in his room and wept sadly. Quentin did not want his daughter to see his tears. 3 years passed in sadness and longing. In that time, Quentin began to do well at work and became a highly qualified specialist. Since Quentin did not have a car, he continued to take a bus to work. One day, he was taking the bus to the factory for an afternoon shift. He was carrying a bag with his personal belongings and wrapped sandwiches for lunch. After entering the bus, he sat at his usual window seat and watched the passers-by go about their business. Suddenly, someone touched Quentin's shoulder softly. The man turned his head and saw a boy of around 8 years old. The boy's clothes looked dirty and untidy, and he had tears in his eyes. "Can you please give me some money? My mother died and my stepfather drinks a lot," the boy said, crying. At that moment, Quentin felt very sorry for the boy. "Yes, of course," said the man as he reached into his pocket. He decided to give the boy all of the money that he had on him. But it turned out that Quentin only had about $10 in his pocket. After giving the money to the boy, Quentin paused for a second before getting the sandwiches out of his bag and also handing them to the boy. "And what about you? Aren't you going to be hungry?" said the boy anxiously. "It's okay, I'm used to it. You take it. You look so skinny," Quentin answered with a smile. The boy wiped away his tears with his sleeve and said, "I will make sure to pay you back." Quentin shook his head. Of course, at that moment, he did not know that the boy sincerely believed in what he was saying. Quentin soon arrived at his stop and got off. For a long time, he couldn't get the boy's face out of his head. Most of all, Quentin was upset that he didn't ask for the boy's name. After some time, Quentin forgot about the incident in the hubbub of daily life and responsibilities. Time flew by unnoticed. Suddenly, Sarah was a teenager, even though it seemed that she was playing with dolls only yesterday. Once, after receiving a bonus at work, Quentin decided to buy his daughter a brand new bike. Sarah had dreamed of it for a long time, but Quentin kept postponing the purchase. Needless to say, Sarah was so happy to be finally getting a new bike. It turns out that you don't need much to be happy when you're 16. Quentin was so glad that his daughter would now be able to go on bike rides with his friends. At that moment, he had absolutely no reason to believe that anything bad would happen. Unfortunately, Quentin was one of the last people to find out what had happened to his daughter 1 week after he bought the bike. It turned out that Sarah was going too fast, lost control of the bike, and fell onto the pavement. The impact was so strong that the teenager suffered a spinal injury. At first, Quentin didn't realize the gravity of the situation. But when he saw the doctor's face, he understood everything without words. Sarah needs surgery. Otherwise, she might remain disabled for the rest of her life. There is still time, but it's better not to delay the procedure, said the doctor, lowering his eyes. Quentin felt uneasy when he found out how much the surgery would cost. The truth was that even if he were to sell his house and all of his possessions, it wouldn't be enough to even cover the post-surgery rehabilitation. Of course, Quentin did not give up and became an even harder worker. Another couple of years passed, and Quentin still did not have enough money to cover the costs of the surgery. Sarah grew into a real beauty and continued to have to use the wheelchair. Of course, she did not blame her father and had long accepted that she would remain disabled. Few people knew that it was Sarah's dream to go into the modeling business, but she felt that it would be impossible in a wheelchair. One day, there was a knock on Quentin's door. Wondering who it could be, the man opened the door and saw a tall man in a suit standing on the threshold. Good afternoon. How can I help you?" Quentin asked cautiously. He believed that it could be a banker or some government official. The young man's name was Tommy Rogers. The expensive car that he parked in front of the house spoke volumes. Quentin realized what was happening a little later when the guest suddenly handed him a $10 bill. That's when the man realized who was standing in front of him. Since Quentin last saw him, Tommy Rogers achieved everything he had dreamed of. All those years, the young businessman continued to wonder about the man who gave him money and fed him lunch. Tommy was busy with work and wasn't able to find Quentin sooner. But he didn't lose heart and knew that he would one day carry out his plan. When Tommy found out about Quentin's troubles, he immediately volunteered to help. A spark of hope lit up in Sarah's eyes. Of course, in order to pay such a large sum of money, Tommy had to take out a loan and use his company's assets as collateral. But at that moment, he was only interested in the health of Quentin's daughter. A month later, Sarah had the surgery, which was successful. Her father and Tommy stayed by her side the entire time. Tommy became Sarah's real guardian angel, but he didn't think so. He simply believed that he was repaying his debt to a man who saved him 20 years prior. Thanks to Tommy, Sarah was able to walk again, which gave her the confidence to join a modeling agency. Quentin rejoiced at his daughter's success and was grateful to the young man who kept his word from 20 years ago. It was rumored that Tommy and Sarah started dating and that it's getting pretty serious. Watching the couple, Quentin can't help but think that Megan sees everything from above and wishes them happiness.